let's get more analysis on the EFF politics with Dr. Ongama Mtimka. Doctor, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. So 11 years of the EFF, a dismal showing at the recent polls, and quite a lot happening within the party itself. Do you think they have any reasons to celebrate at this stage?
Good afternoon to you and your viewers, Alicia. Thank you for having me. There's a lot to celebrate for the EFF. I have profiled initiatives on 2 scientific papers to build left-leaning organizations. And the EFF has been the first to boldly leave the politics of the ANC, to launch a political party and build it and have it last in the election space in South Africa for a period of now 3 national elections. So that's no small feat. It's been very difficult to build political organizations outside of the ANC. And we saw, for example, NUMSA, a very resourced party, tried this 2 times with the United Front in 2016 and the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party in 2019. And in both times it performed dismally. The EFF, on the other hand, has been growing. And I think part of the reason why they grew up until last year is because they leveraged the organizational machinery of the Youth League, which they left the ANC, as leaders of, and were able to kind of secure the organization outside of the ANC. I think even to this day, the EFF has got growth prospects, but it's clear for South Africans that for the next big thing for them as the EFF, it's a question of how they adapt with the times, in terms of a political program that's more sellable, but also a political program that's more viable and practical, and a rhetoric that's more uniting, even as they agitate against the divisions that continue to exist economically.
Doctor, speaking of growth prospects as well as adaptation, let's look further at what has been some of the key as well as critical points pertaining to the internal party dynamics that has led them this far. Obviously, as you've mentioned, they're a breakaway party by former ANC members. Not many gave it longevity in the current political space, yet against all odds, they did in fact manage to keep up appearances. So they're still in parliament and still are a force to be reckoned with in terms of being in the opposition benches.
Absolutely, and I think that success has got to do with the personality of Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu and how they've contained potential differences between the two of them, but also the strong grip, almost dictatorial, that Julius Malema has had on the organization, even saying things that sound arrogant, like, this is my thing, I'm in charge here. I remember him saying that in a press briefing. Indeed, he's dealt with dissent significantly. You asked the key moments in its path in the last, say, 11 years. I think that the EFF, I saw Julius Malema reciting how successful they were in their first term in parliament, because at that challenge, they were 2 dominant ANC and were so successful, in my view, that they augmented the seats that they actually had, because they had about 25. You would not be, people would be tempted to say the EFF was the official opposition even back in that time. They really pushed Mmusi Maimane on a corner because they brought a politics of disruption and other things which South African Parliament was not used to. However, when there was a transition from the Zuma to the Ramaphosa administration, I think they didn't sit and calculate how they were going to strike and when then. They started raising things like corruption and all of those things long before there was even the Pala scandal that came out. And to this day, they failed to kind of, make those allegations bite, of corruption, because initially they were trying to decampaign the Ramaphosa presidency around this issue of corruption. But it's now the third term in Parliament. They haven't been able to do that. Then, obviously, we know that I actually estimated that the EFF was going to battle to grow. I estimated it was going to grow between 1 to 3%. And the reason why I argued that would be the case is because you see, voters respond to party offerings following big national issues. So there was an anti-Zuma sentiment in 2014. There was an anti-Cyril sentiment in 2019. That's why they were able to gain some support. In this year, they didn't have much by way of a big rallying issue that's making people to be so angry as to show up at the polls and vote. So as a result of that, I knew that their growth was limited and it was going to be marginal. And so what they are going to have to work on going forward is, again, as I say, a more truthful political agenda. Because the EFF, I'm listening to talk about how there's corruption in Northern Cape and among other things. But the point is that they themselves, when there's been allegations of corruption within their ranks, they didn't act with humility, they didn't act with courage, they didn't act to show that they will not tolerate corruption. So in my view, it's a duplicitous behavior. They are not committed at all to clean governance. Because on the one level, they're talking about they're not part of the GNU, and they are flirting with groups that are known to be anti-rule of law in the ANC. So it's a duplicitous and incoherent program as far as where it matters the most on the mundane issues, even if they are clear as far as their ideological program is concerned.
Doctor, I like the fact that you bring up those terms like dictatorial personalities of certain leaders. Very quickly, before I let you go, how should they then, particularly at this stage, restructure? Where do they start rebuilding and shifting focus? Because interestingly enough, is that the issue of leadership pertaining the party and who would be best suitable to lead the party as well as reform structures is something that they don't really want to entertain. But is there some oversight on their part? And how would you advise them they explore such dynamics?
First of all, they need to jettison radically sounding and self-gratifying policy ideas for more pragmatic, more practical solutions for South Africa. Perhaps they'd be a lot more successful in selling to a much wider vote.
Unfortunately, we have lost. Yes, Doctor, are you still there? I think we lost you there for a second. Please continue.
So I was saying the second point is that they need to be a lot more truthful. I think that manipulation is something which is a temptation that is very strong and proving hard for them to resist. I think they should stop that thing and focus on what is truthfully something that they want to offer to South Africans, as far as, for example, on the issue of corruption and crime, and on the issue of a more inclusive economy. You cannot be talking about creating inclusion for the poor while you allegedly steal from the poor. So those, in my view, the issue of the grandeur of the policy ideas that they have and how irrelevant they are in the 21st century, and a lot more truthfulness as far as values-based offering and politicking.